We are back with the penultimate episode of my Brewmaster Master Class series. Up to this point, we've covered everything from damage to mitigation and everything in between. In this episode, I want to move beyond the class and talk specifically about threat and how to set up pulls. Without wasting any time, let's dive right in. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of threat modifiers, mainly since it's an ever-changing landscape, the most important thing a tank can do to prevent threat issues is by dealing big dam. Understanding which of your abilities hit hard will help you establish threat early and maintain it throughout the pull. As we've discussed in previous episodes, Keg Smash is your best friend. Regardless of the hero talent you're playing, Keg Smash does a few things. It not only does high damage, especially in large AoE, but it also grants the Brewmaster Shuffle, which is your base mitigation. In 99% of scenarios, you should aim to hit Keg Smash early and often when grouping up pulls. Beyond Keg Smash, Blackout Kick also deals heavy damage to 3 targets. Both Shado-pan and Master of Harmony will have additional benefits to casting this ability as well. This will be important later. Alternatively, both Chi Burst and Exploding Keg can be utilized early into a pull to establish a massive amount of threat. While it's not ideal, if you need to send one of these abilities early in a pull, it's worth it. Beyond your core kit, Chi Surge is a talent that is in the spec tree that can be a nice option for burst potential. This applies a sizable damage over time effect once the player activates Weapons of Order. This ends up being an added benefit to Weapons of Order, which cooldown provides a small mastery boon and a ramping damage taken increase to all mobs afflicted by Keg Smash or Rising Sun Kick. Relying on Chi Surge though for threat is not ideal, but being aware of the damage it provides when you have the cooldown available is better than not. While Shado-pan relies more directly on Keg Smash and Blackout Kick to establish threat, Master of Harmony has a secret ace up its sleeve. As we discussed previously, when casting Celestial Brew or Celestial Infusion, you'll dump vitality that was accumulated onto the mobs. This not only does damage over time, but this debuff also causes the Brewmaster to deal 20% more damage. Keeping this in mind, we will start a pull by applying Rushing Jade Wind, then casting Keg Smash and Blackout Kick as previously mentioned. Then we're going to want to cast Celestial Brew early, which will dump the small amount of vitality that we've gained onto our enemies, and it'll be applied to every mob since you have the Rushing Jade Wind aura. Now that all mobs are taking 20% more damage, your future Keg Smashes, Overwhelming Force hits, Chi Burst, and Exploding Keg will pack a punch. What's nice about this gameplay loop is that you can pretty much replicate this on every single pull. You Keg Smash, you cast Celestial Brew early, and then you get the free damage amp. Let's walk through a quick example of how we set up a larger pull. In this case, we're going to be taking a look at Ecodome Aldani, a Season 3 dungeon in the War Within expansion. In this example, I am running a Shado-pan build that is opting out of Breath of Fire and instead playing Rushing Jade Wind. This is important to note because talents can change over time, or if you're watching this in the future. We are first going to start by applying Rushing Jade Wind. This is an early threat generation catalyst that's going to help out later in the pull. Next, we're going to target our first pack and cast Keg Smash. This will not only grant Shuffle, but it's going to get some good damage rolling. Next, the same 3-pack, we're going to cast Blackout Kick on. This should establish most of our early threat. Then we're going to roll into the next pack and cast Spinning Crane Kick. This paired with our already active Rushing Jade Wind should keep threat for a few more seconds while we continue grouping. Next, a Crackling Jade Lightning is quickly deployed onto a far pack. Then a priority taunt is cast on the primary target of the pull, which is this Ravenous Destroyer. Once the pack begins to group, we are going to reapply our Rushing Jade Wind and cast our Weapons of Order. This applies Chi Surge to all the targets in the pull and is going to refund a Keg Smash charge that we used a few seconds earlier. Immediately following the cooldown, we are now going to discharge a Keg Smash. As you can tell though, the healer, of all people, had a very explosive start to the pull, not just with damage, but also the healing. Healing, for those who don't know, also generates threat, so healers like Preservation Evoker can end up in a lot of trouble. While it's not ideal, I knew that the best way to maintain and get threat back immediately was to cast Exploding Keg. Now in ideal scenarios, we would have held this cooldown for a few more seconds to allow Weapons of Order to fully ramp, but keeping our group alive during Lust is way more important than a minor gain in overall damage. Following this, Rising Sun Kick and Keg Smash are deployed once more to put our damage amp up to 3 stacks, or in other words, 24%. The rest of the pull is going to play out just as it should. Once threat is established, it's pretty difficult for players to rip. This is the main thing to keep in mind in early pulls. So there's 2 or 3 main takeaways from this clip. First and foremost, using your harder hitting abilities as you gather pulls is key. Keg Smash hits an uncapped amount of targets and generally is best when there are 3 or more targets to hit. Blackout Kick, on the other hand, does very similar damage to Keg Smash and hits 3 targets. Planning can go a long way as well. Keg Smashing one pack, Blackout Kicking the next, and then Keg Smashing the third pack can establish really good threat early on in the pull. As you pull more, you may need to allocate different set of abilities to maintain threat as you gather. While Rushing Jade Wind and Spinning Crane Kick are good and it's a soft passive way to tag mobs, you shouldn't rely on them to do the heavy lifting. The second big takeaway here is to send larger hitting abilities early if it's needed. This can change entirely based on your group composition, but being aware of early threat can be the difference between a clean pull and an absolute clusterfuck. The last thing I do want to note is that there's just nothing you can really do to combat overzealous DPS or even healers in this case. Ultimately, it's up to your group to wait until a pull is gathered before unloading their damage. While you can help prevent threat issues early on with Exploding Keg or Chi Burst, you as a player are limited in your capabilities. If a DPS dies because they popped Wings or Stormkeeper or Breath, immediately that's on them and don't let them tell you otherwise. Sometimes overzealous players need to learn their lesson. Spoiler, they never learn. There is an additional tool that Brewmasters have access to that can help with threats. I've talked about Black Ox Statue in previous videos on my channel, but I'm going to showcase it here as well. This talent is currently located in our class tree, and this is a totem-like ability that can be placed anywhere within 40 yards of the Brewmaster. When it is placed, it will radiate a small amount of threats while it's active and will generally pull any mob within 15 yards of the statue. While this isn't super useful by itself, the Brewmaster can cast Provoke on the statue, which will then apply Provoke to all mobs within a few yards, forcing them to attack the Brewmaster instead. Unfortunately, this does not apply the threat modifier to the mobs, but it can buy you time to get threat. There are a few macros that are roaming around that allow the Brewmaster to taunt the statue. I personally use the one that's on screen here. This one allows me to cast Provoke on any mob that I am currently targeting, but if I press a Alt key, which is a modifier macro, it'll target the statue, cast Provoke, and then target my last target, allowing me to keep the flow of combat. Similarly, players have shared this macro with me before, which will place the statue and then immediately taunt it instead. Both of these macros work, and I will leave them pinned down below, but just future note, all macros I have can be found in my Discord server. The last thing I do want to quickly discuss is composition. Playing with a good hunter or rogue can be a total game changer. Not that Pug players do this often, but Tricks of the Trade and Misdirect should be used on cooldown by these players and classes. If you happen to be playing with a rogue or a hunter friend, make sure you let them know that they should cast this on you at the start of pulls. Luckily, Brewmaster is a tank that grants 5% more physical damage as well, so both of these classes will benefit a hefty amount from the composition. Threat can be a frustrating game mechanic, partly because Blizzard hasn't done a great job balancing this extremely outdated system. Threat, while it may seem like a tank mechanic, ultimately does come down to group effort. The tank should be the first to pull, and both healers and DPS alike should wait a few seconds before engaging. I hope this video did help though, provide you with some insight and tips on how to manage threat, and instilled some confidence in your next dungeon run. Remember that practice does make perfect. This series is wrapping up, and the final episode will be a frequently asked questions episode where I'm going to cover questions that you guys have left in the comments, any minor details that I've missed, and final tips for the Brewmaster Monk. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. A massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters and newly added channel members. Their support allows me to make videos like this. Best of luck out there, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.